mean I'll see it.
Everyone thinks they know the person they sleep next to, but you never really do. You only know the version they decide to show you. I lived with Mark for 3 years, and for most of that time, I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. He was steady, protective, and always there to pick up the pieces when things went wrong. The problem was, things started going wrong way too often. It started with the neighborhood. People were calling it a crime wave, but looking back, it was too specific, too targeted. It began with the neighbor's dog, a golden retriever that used to bark at the fence. One morning, the neighbor found it in the bushes. It hadn't just been killed, it had been opened up, the stomach sliced clean from sternum to tail, the insides spilled out like a heap of wet, pink laundry. The police came, took notes, and left. A week later, someone smashed the windows of the car parked right across from her driveway. Then, the break-ins started. People would wake up to find their front door standing wide open, nothing stolen, just open. The terror in the neighborhood was thick, like a suffocating pressure that sat on everyone's chest. Mark was the one who stepped up. He bought better locks, installed motion lights, and then he told me about the app. He called it Sentry. He said it was a high-end security suite used by private contractors. It tracked my GPS, but more importantly, it had a live stream audio feature. If I felt unsafe, I could activate it, and he could listen in real time, or it would record snippets of audio if it detected aggressive frequencies. I felt like a burden, being so jumpy all the time. I thanked him for it. I really did. I let him install it, give him all the permissions, and let him link it to his own phone. For months, it was my lifeline. Every time I heard a floorboard creak or a branch hit the window, I'd look at that little blue icon on my screen and feel a sense of relief. Mark would text me immediately, "I see you're home, babe. You're safe." I'm watching the feed. But the incidents at our house kept escalating. I came out one morning to find my front tires had been shredded. Not just punctured, but systematically ruined. The rubber was hanging off the rims in long, jagged strips. A few days later, I found deep, violent gouges in the wooden frame of our back door. They looked like claw marks, but they were too straight, too deliberate. The wood was splintered and raw, looking like a fresh wound. I was becoming a nervous wreck. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't work. I felt like I was being hunted by something invisible, something that was slowly closing the circle around me. I stopped going out. I stopped seeing friends. I only felt okay when Mark was there, holding me, telling me that he was the only one who could keep me safe. Then came that night. Mark had gone out to get some groceries, or so he said. I was sitting on the sofa, the house pitch black because I was too scared to even have the lights on, thinking maybe if the house looked empty, the monster would bypass us. My phone was on the coffee table. The Sentry app was open. Suddenly, the screen flickered. The active listening icon turned red. This usually only happened if I triggered it or if there was a loud noise, but the house was silent. I thought it was a glitch. I picked it up, intending to close it, but then I heard something through the phone's speaker. It was static at first, a low, rhythmic scratching. Then, the sound of breathing. It wasn't my breathing. It was coming from the monitor side of the app, the side Mark controlled. He must have left his mic open. I pressed the phone to my ear, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard it hurt. I heard a voice. It was low, muffled, but unmistakably Mark. He wasn't at the store. He was whispering to someone. "She's almost there," Mark said. There was a weird, wet sound, like he was chewing on something soft. Another week of the scratches, maybe another entry while she's in the shower. She won't even go to the mailbox now without calling me. It's perfect. I heard another voice, a man I didn't recognize. "You went too far with the dog, man. That was a lot of mess." Mark chuckled. It wasn't his normal, warm laugh. It was a cold, dry sound that made the hair on my neck stand up. The mess is the point. You have to make the threat visceral. If it's just a broken window, she gets annoyed. If it's a pile of guts, she gets traumatized. Trauma makes people compliant. It makes them clingy. She looks at me like I'm a god because I'm the only thing standing between her and that psycho outside. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to swallow hard to keep from gagging. The room began to spin. Every scare, every incident that had eroded my sanity over the last 6 months, it was him. My protector was the predator. But it got worse. "What about the basement?" the other voice asked. "It's ready," Mark replied. I could hear the sound of metal clinking, the sound of chains. I've got the soundproofing up. Once I save her from the final break-in, I'll tell her we need to move for her safety. We'll come here. She'll never have to see the sun again, and she'll thank me for it. She'll thank me for keeping her buried. The audio cut out. The red icon vanished. The app had timed out. I sat there in the dark, the silence of the house suddenly feeling like a tomb. I had to move. I had to get out. I grabbed my keys, but then I remembered the back door was gouged and the front door was deadbolt from the outside. Mark always locked us in for safety when he left. I ran to the kitchen, grabbing the largest knife I could find. My mind was racing, trying to find a way out, when I heard the garage door moan as it started to rise. He was home. I couldn't get out the front. I couldn't get out the back. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran for the basement door. I knew he'd look for me in the bedroom or the living room first. I slipped down the stairs, my bare feet hitting the cold concrete. The air down there was different. It didn't smell like the rest of the house. It had a damp, salty odor, the smell of a butcher's shop where the floors haven't been housed down in a week. It was the scent of old, dried fluids and rot. I tucked myself behind a stack of storage bins in the far corner near the water heater. I could hear his footsteps above me. They were slow, deliberate. Thump, thump, thump. He was moving through the kitchen. "Sarah?" he called out. His voice was so sweet, so full of feigned concern. "Babe, why are the lights off? You're going to trip." I pressed the knife against my leg, the cold steel the only thing keeping me grounded. I heard him move toward the basement door. The hinges creaked. A sliver of light from the kitchen spilled down the stairs, cutting through the darkness like a blade. "Sarah? I know you're down here. The app told me you moved to the cellar." My blood turned to ice. The app. It wasn't just audio, it was a motion tracker. He knew exactly where I was. I heard him descending the stairs, one slow step at a time. He wasn't rushing. Why would he? He had already won. "I saw that you heard the recording, Sarah," he said, his voice dropping an octave. The sweetness was gone, replaced by a flat, terrifying neutrality. "I didn't mean for you to find out that way. I wanted it to be a surprise. I've worked so hard on this for us." He reached the bottom of the stairs. I could see his silhouette in the dim light. He wasn't carrying groceries. He was carrying a roll of silver duct tape and a heavy, jagged hunting knife, the kind with a serrated spine used for sawing through bone. "The neighbor's dog, that was just practice," he whispered, walking toward the storage bins. I wanted to see how it felt to open something up. It's surprisingly easy, like unzipping a jacket. I didn't wait for him to reach me. I lunged from behind the bins, screaming, swinging the kitchen knife with everything I had. I felt the blade sink into something soft, his shoulder or his neck, I couldn't tell. He roared in pain, but he didn't fall. He grabbed my hair, yanking my head back so hard I heard my neck crack. The smell of him was overwhelming now, the scent of stale sweat and that awful, salty rot. I bit his hand, tasting the salt and iron of his skin, and he let out a snarl, throwing me against the concrete wall. My head hit the stone, and for a second, the world went white. I slumped to the floor, my vision blurring. I could see him standing over me, clutching his neck, blood leaking through his fingers. It looked black in the dim light, thick and viscous. "You shouldn't have done that," he wheezed. "Now it's going to have to be painful. I wanted this to be a transition. Now it's just a harvest." He stepped toward me, raising his knife. I scrambled backward, my hand hitting something on the floor. It was a heavy wrench Mark had left out from a repair. I didn't think. I just swung. I felt the impact vibrate up my arm as the metal connected with his kneecap. The sound was sickening, a sharp crack like a dry log snapping in half. Mark screamed and collapsed, his leg folding at an impossible angle. I didn't stay to see him get up. I scrambled up the stairs, my lungs burning, and threw myself against the front door. It was locked. I turned to the window next to the door, grabbed a heavy decorative vase from the hallway table, and smashed it through the glass. I didn't care about the shards. I crawled through, the glass tearing at my stomach and thighs, leaving long, weeping gashes in my skin. I ran. I didn't go to a neighbor's house. I didn't trust anyone. I ran until I reached the main road, flanking down a passing car. When the police finally went into the house, they didn't find Mark. He had dragged himself out through the garage, despite the shattered knee. But they did find what was behind the false wall in the basement. It wasn't just a soundproofed room. There were photographs. Hundreds of them. Not just of me, but of 6 other women from the surrounding towns. 3 of them were still listed as missing. The police found trophies in jars. Pieces of skin, carefully preserved in formaldehyde, each one bearing a distinct tattoo or birthmark. He wasn't just trying to keep me dependent. He was adding to a collection. He had been grooming me to be the centerpiece. I'm in a different state now. I changed my name. I don't use a smartphone anymore. I don't have an app to tell me I'm safe. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed, I'll hear a faint, rhythmic scratching coming from inside the walls. I tell myself it's just rats. I tell myself the house is old. But then I remember that cold, dry laugh, and I wonder if he's finally finished healing his knee.
Next story.
There's this specific kind of haze that settles over you when you aren't fully awake, but you aren't asleep either. It feels like your brain is wrapped in damp wool, thick and stifling. For months, that was my entire world. Every single morning, I would wake up and feel like I was trying to swim through a pool of cold molasses. My head would throb with this dull, rhythmic pulse, and my eyes felt like they had been rubbed with sand. I just assumed it was the stress of the new job or maybe some kind of late-onset insomnia I didn't know I had. Mark was always there, though. He was the perfect husband, or at least that is what I told everyone. He'd be standing by the bed with a fresh cup of coffee, the sunlight hitting the steam just right, looking at me with those concerned, soft eyes. He'd tell me I looked exhausted. He'd tell me I'd been tossing and turning all night, talking in my sleep, sometimes even getting up and walking around the house. I didn't remember any of it. To me, the nights were just black holes, total, absolute nothingness that left me more tired than before I laid down. The wellness tea became our nightly ritual. Mark started making it around the time the exhaustion got really bad. It was a blend of chamomile, valerian root, and some other herbs he said he'd found at a high-end apothecary downtown. It tasted a bit bitter, but he always drowned it in honey and lemon, so I didn't think much of it. He'd sit on the edge of the bed and watch me drink the whole thing, rubbing my feet and telling me how much he loved me. It was sweet. It It was supposed to be sweet. Then the bruises started showing up. I found the first one on my inner thigh. It was deep, sickly yellow with a dark purple center, shaped almost like a crescent moon. A few days later, I found 3 more on my upper arm, perfectly spaced like the grip of a hand. When I showed them to Mark, he looked devastated. He held my arm so gently and told me he'd seen me run into the dresser while I was sleepwalking the night before. He said he tried to lead me back to bed, but I was combative. He sounded so tired, like my condition was taking a toll on him, too. I felt so guilty. I felt like I was losing my mind, and I was dragging him down with me. But things stopped making sense. I'd wake up and my car would be parked facing the opposite way in the driveway. Or I'd check my phone and see that I'd sent long, coherent texts to my sister at 3 in the morning. Texts about recipes or old memories, things I had zero recollection of typing. My sister even mentioned that my late-night rants were getting a bit weird, but Mark had already called her to tell her I was struggling with some sleep issues, so she didn't push it. He was insulating me. He was building a wall of crazy around me so high that I couldn't see over the top. The breaking point was the smell. One morning, I woke up and the air in the bedroom didn't smell like the lavender spray Mark used. It smelled raw. It had that sharp, iron-like tang that reminds you of a butcher shop that hasn't been housed down properly. It was the scent of something organic and wet. I felt a stinging sensation on the bottom of my foot, and when I pulled back the covers, there was a thin, jagged slice along my heel. It wasn't deep, but it was clean, like a surgical cut. That was the day I bought the camera. It was a tiny thing disguised as a USB wall charger. I plugged it into the outlet in the kitchen, facing the counter where Mark made the tea every night. That evening, I did the routine. I took the tea, I pretended to take a few sips, and then I told him I felt a sudden wave of sleepiness. I went to the bedroom, poured the tea into a plastic Tupperware container I'd hidden under the bed, and waited. I stayed awake as long as I could, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Eventually, I heard him come down the hall. I shut my eyes and focused on keeping my breathing slow and shallow. He didn't just tuck me in. He stood over me for a long, long time. I could feel his breath on my forehead. Then he peeled back the covers and started moving my limbs. He wasn't being rough, but he was being precise. He moved my arms into different positions, like he was posing a doll. The next morning, as soon as he left for work, I grabbed the camera. I sat on the floor of the kitchen and watched the footage on my laptop. I saw Mark standing at the counter. He reached into the back of the pantry, behind a stack of flour bags, and pulled out a small, amber-colored prescription bottle. My heart stopped. Those were my high-dose sleeping pills, the ones I thought I had lost 4 months ago. I remember crying because I couldn't find them. On the video, Mark took 2 of the pills and placed them in a stone mortar and pestle. He ground them down into a fine, white dust with a rhythmic, scraping sound that made my skin crawl. He stirred the powder into the tea, his face completely blank. No malice, no anger. Just a terrifying, flat neutrality. But it wasn't just the tea. The footage showed him coming back into the kitchen around 2 in the morning. He was carrying me. I was completely limp, my head lolling back over his arm like a piece of slaughtered meat. He set me down in one of the kitchen chairs. He had a small black bag with him. He opened it and pulled out a series of metal instruments that caught the dim light of the stove clock. He spent an hour working on me. He wasn't trying to kill me. It was worse. He was exploring. He used a scalpel to make tiny, shallow incisions on the soles of my feet and the insides of my thighs, places I wouldn't easily notice. He'd watch the blood bead up, that thick, dark liquid that pulled in the grooves of my skin, and then he'd carefully dab it away with a cotton swab, which he then put into a small glass vial. He looked at the vial against the light like it was a prize. The most gut-wrenching part was when he started talking to me. He whispered into my ear, You're so much better when you're quiet. You're so much more mine when you can't talk back. He then picked up my phone and spent 20 minutes typing, his thumbs flying across the screen with a practiced ease. He moved my car later that night, just like I suspected. He was crafting a version of me that was falling apart, while the real me was being drained, drop by drop, in the dark. I couldn't breathe as I watched him finish. He cleaned the counter with bleach, that suffocating, chemical scent that I'd been smelling for weeks and mistaking for cleanliness. He kissed my forehead, carried me back to bed, and then went to sleep right next to me. I'm sitting in a library right now, typing this out because I don't know where else to go. I didn't go back to the house. I have the Tupperware of tea in my bag, and I have the camera. But the thing that is keeping me from going to the police right this second, the thing that is making me feel so leaden and sick, is what I found in the very last few minutes of the footage. Right before the camera cut out because the memory was full, Mark looked directly at the spice jar where the camera was hidden. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look angry. He just leaned in close until his eye filled the entire frame, and he whispered, "I wondered when you'd want to watch, too." He knew. He's known the whole time. And now I'm looking at my phone, and I've just received a text from my own number. It says, "Don't be late for tea, honey. I made it extra sweet tonight." I'm looking around the library, and every man in a dark coat looks like him. Every shadow looks like it's reaching for me. He hasn't just drugged my body, he's poisoned my entire reality. I don't know if I'm even awake right now. I don't know if this post is real or if I'm sitting in that kitchen chair, watching him reach for his bag of silver tools while I drift further and further away into the dark.
Next story.
It started with the moisturizer. That sounds stupid, I know, but you have to understand how specific Sarah used to be about her own stuff. She had this whole organic, scentless routine because she had sensitive skin or whatever. Then one night, I'm brushing my teeth and I see my bottle of expensive, clinical-grade retinol sitting on her side of the sink. I didn't think much of it, figured she just ran out of her own. But then a week later, I noticed she bought the exact same brand of shampoo I use. The same face wash. Even the same specific charcoal toothpaste that tastes like dirt but keeps my gums from bleeding. It was like our bathroom mirror was starting to reflect the same person twice. At first, I made a joke about it. I told her she was turning into me, and she just gave me this look, this slow, blinking stare that lasted a second too long. Then she laughed. But it wasn't her laugh. Sarah used to have this high-pitched, wheezing giggle that made her nose scrunch up. This laugh was different. It was lower. It had this specific, dry cadence to it. It was my laugh. The one I use when I'm trying to be polite in a group of strangers. I felt a chill move down my spine that was so suffocating and dense it made me want to step out of the room just to breathe. She started dressing like me next. I don't mean she borrowed my hoodies, everyone does that. I mean she went out and bought the exact same pair of scuffed up boots I've had for 3 years. She bought the same faded black jeans with the tear in the left knee. She even started wearing her hair in that messy, lopsided bun I do when I'm too tired to care. We go out to get coffee and people would look at us like we were twins or some weird cult. I'd catch her watching me from across the table, her eyes tracking the way I held my mug, the way I tapped my fingers against the ceramic. She wasn't looking at me with love. She was studying me. She was downloading me. The air in our apartment started to feel different. It was thick and stifling, like the atmosphere right before a massive storm breaks. I began staying late at work just to avoid the feeling of being watched in my own home. But even that didn't help. I came home one night and found her sitting in the dark, scrolling through my old Instagram posts from years before we met. She was practicing my slang. I heard her whisper a phrase I only use when I'm frustrated, something my grandmother used to say. She said it over and over, adjusting the inflection until it sounded identical to my own voice. It was the most unsettling thing I've ever heard. It sounded like a recording of myself played back through a broken speaker. The breaking point happened when I came home early because of a migraine. The apartment was quiet, but the bathroom light was on. I walked in, expecting to find her in the shower, but the door was cracked open. I saw her standing in front of the vanity, and for a second, I actually thought I was looking into a mirror that wasn't there. She was hunched over, her back to me, but I could see her profile in the glass. She had a pair of tweezers and a small, surgical scalpel she must have bought online. She was looking at a photo of me taped to the mirror, a close-up I'd taken after a hiking accident where I got a jagged scar right above my eyebrow. I watched, paralyzed, as she took the blade and carefully, methodically, began to slice into her own skin in the exact same spot. She didn't flinch. She didn't make a sound. She just watched the blood start to bead up and drip down her cheek. The room didn't smell like her usual lavender soap anymore. It smelled like a raw, white iron, the sharp, metallic scent of a butcher shop floor after a long shift. I backed away, tripping over a stack of books she'd left in the hallway. She heard me. She didn't turn around immediately. She finished the cut first, then slowly rotated her head. She looked at me with that bleeding, open wound on her forehead and smiled with my teeth. "You're home early," she said. Her voice was a perfect, terrifying match for my own. I ran. I didn't grab my keys or my coat. I just bolted out the door and drove until I ran out of gas. I stayed at a motel that night, locking the door and pushing the dresser in front of it. While I sat there, shaking, I realized I'd left my laptop in the apartment. I logged into our shared cloud drive from my phone, thinking I'd changed my passwords, but then I saw a folder I'd never noticed before. It was titled with my initials. I opened it, and my stomach just turned over. It wasn't just photos. It was a manual. Hundreds of pages of notes. She had spreadsheets tracking my sleep cycles. She had recordings of my phone calls with my mother, transcribed and analyzed for emotional triggers. She had a list of my weaknesses, my nut allergy, my fear of deep water, the fact that I keep a spare key under the loose brick in the back garden. But the worst part was the most recent entry. It was dated that morning. It just said, "Subject is becoming aware. Physical divergence is narrowing. The original is now redundant. Transition phase, 90% complete. Disposal required to prevent social friction." I felt this leaden, oppressive dread settle into my chest. She wasn't just trying to be me, she was preparing to replace me entirely. She'd been laying the groundwork with my friends for months. I started checking my messages and realized she'd been texting my best friend from a burner account, pretending to be a concerned mutual acquaintance, saying I'd been acting unstable and suicidal. She was building a narrative so that when I disappeared, no one would ask questions. They'd just see her, dressed like me, talking like me, acting like me, and they'd think I'd finally just snapped and left, or worse. I went back to the apartment the next morning with 2 police officers. I was terrified of what we'd find, but the place was empty. The lights were all on, and the scent of that raw, metallic blood still hung in the air, but Sarah was gone. All of her clothes were gone. All of my clothes were gone, too. She'd taken everything that made me me. The cops didn't do much. There was no signs of a struggle, and copying someone isn't exactly a crime they can put you in jail for, even with the notebook. They called it a domestic dispute and told me to get a restraining order. That was 3 weeks ago. I've moved to a different city. I changed my hair, I stopped wearing my favorite brands, I even tried to change the way I speak. But yesterday, I got a notification on my phone. Someone had logged into my Netflix account from a location 3 towns over. I checked the recently watched list. It was all the shows I like. Everything I was halfway through watching before I ran away. And then I saw a new profile had been added to the account. It didn't have a name. It just had a picture. It was a photo taken through a window, a grainy, nighttime shot of me sitting on the bed in my new apartment, looking at my phone. I looked at the profile picture again, zooming in until the pixels blurred. In the reflection of the window behind me, you can see a shape standing in the trees. It's a woman. She's wearing my old boots. She's wearing my favorite black jeans with the tear in the left knee. And even from that distance, I can see the dark, jagged line of a fresh scar right above her eyebrow. She's not just following me. She's waiting for the scar to heal so it matches mine perfectly. She's waiting for the scent of the iron to fade so she can step back into my life, and this time, she won't leave any witnesses to tell us apart.
Next story. Next story is yours. Take a look at the shadow in the corner of your room. Are you sure it was that shape a minute ago? Subscribe or be the next in line.